Let me get back to where I need to be. Let's see. There we go. Welcome to Linder Road Church of Christ. Sunday morning class. We were studying the epic of God, which was Genesis. And as you might recall, we got to chapter 50, and that's the last chapter in the book. So we're going to keep going on through Exodus because Exodus begins with Jacob's family, continuing on with it. So we're going to see how this family progresses as we go through Exodus. And as a quick recap, you may recall, let's see, I want to go back this way. I hit the wrong buttons. You may recall that there's three settings in Exodus. They're in Egypt, initially when you get started, the trip to Sinai, and then at Sinai, the latter part of Exodus. Some background, if you will. It starts with the birth and call of Moses, plagues of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, tabernacle, giving of the law at Sinai. So that's a pretty brief overview. And then we talked a little bit about the authorship. I believe it was Moses, and I think the Bible supports that. Jacob's family grows strong. In Exodus 1, it starts out with reminding you who Jacob's family is. And in there's a total number of 70 people went in. So you have the bookend, if you will. The number of people that went into Egypt was about 70. And then you're going to see them coming out, and they've grown quite a bit. They've grown quite a bit. And so they were in this area where that red dot is, actually to your left. The land of Goshen is where they were living. And so then we start, the second chapter is where we're going to be at. But before we get into that, what I want to call to your attention, every time I see this picture, it just impresses me more and more that the numbers that came out of it. Now, we did speak about whether it was a several million or 60,000 or so that went out. My point is 70 went in and a whole bunch went out as we get in here. So we can quibble over the exact numbers, and you can say that's basis for criticizing the Bible. All I can tell you is that, well, okay, but it's not. Doesn't say exactly how many, but it does give you a counting of the men. 600,000 men, and most men back in those days had wives, so that would be add two, kind of thing, add one. And so the number grew. These people grew to the point that the Egyptians were concerned about them. And so they put them in slavery. They were afraid of them, but the harder that the Egyptians made the work upon the Egyptians, the greater they grew. An amazing story. We'll have more about that in just a moment. Let's have a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day. We're so grateful that we wake up and we see your world that you've created for us, and then the time that we spend here glorifying you. We're so honored for that time. As we read this story and look at your word and see the amazing way you took care of your family that you chose, and that out of this family that Jesus came at the appointed time. We're so grateful that we can see this history so that we better understand what took place and what you want us to know. Lord, be with us as we go through this class. Help us to keep our thoughts and minds on what you wrote for us so that we may understand the things that you have said to us. And in Christ's name we pray. Amen. I think as I was looking through this, going back over it, if you look back over in Genesis, the 45th chapter, verses 4 through 8. So Joseph said to them, and you recall this is where he initially reveals himself to them. He's gone through a bit of a time whenever he puts his cup in Benjamin's sack. He does several things that hasn't revealed who he was. He spoke through a translator so that they didn't know he understood them. But he said to them after he revealed himself to them, he says, "Come close to me." When the brothers came close to him, he said to them, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold as a slave to go to Egypt. Now don't be worried or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. God sent me here ahead of you to save people's lives." No food has grown on the land for 2 years now, and there will be 5 more years without planting or harvest. So God sent me here ahead of you to make sure you have some descendants left on earth and keep you alive in an amazing way. So it was that you who sent me here, so it wasn't you who sent me here. Let me rephrase that. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. God has made me the highest officer of the king of Egypt. I am in charge of his palace, and I am the master of all the land of Egypt. That phrase that I've highlighted there, to keep you alive in an amazing way. It dawned on me after I started thinking about what was going to happen in Exodus, that's pretty amazing what's coming up. That these things would happen, and yet his people survived. They thrived. They grew. Thus in an amazing way. And he repeats it again. Don't be afraid. Remember after their father died, the brothers were quite concerned now that their father, who they felt was possibly the cushion or the protection from their brother Joseph. And he affirms he forgave his brothers because Joseph realized who put him in this situation that he was in, that it was God. He says, don't be afraid. Can I do what only God can do? You meant to hurt me, but God turned your evil into good to save the lives of many people, which is being done. Don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children. What an amazing story. And Joseph, based on everything we can read about him, gives all the credit to God. He realizes this is where his destiny was. This is what God put before him. And he became the most powerful man, second most powerful man, I should say, in Egypt. And we saw from the funeral procession that story, that particular man, the character of Joseph, was well thought of by the king, his officers, his people. What an amazing story. So we got 3 settings. We're in Egypt at this time. And Exodus 2, where we're going to start, is about baby Moses, which some can allude to baby Jesus. But anyway, yes, Ruth. Uh-huh. To be a father to Pharaoh? I don't know the age. I don't think we know the age. Ruth is saying that her translation, is that King James? Yeah, because it sent him there to be the father of Pharaoh. I don't know that he was necessarily older or younger. It's just that when you think of a father, one who protects, one who encourages. Yeah, and so after that vision of the 7 years of good crops and 7 years of bad crops, he took care of them. Took care of them like a father. Took care of the nation Egypt like a father. So baby Moses. Now I thought about handing out this coloring page so that you could color it in this story. You're welcome to ask me to send it to you, and you can color it on your iPad with your iPencil, if you like. How many remember getting this when they were younger? Not this one, but something like it. Yeah. And was it fun coloring it? How many of you stayed in the lines? Oh, there was one in the lines. My wife would have stayed in the lines, But it's a wonderful story. I think of the many stories that are out there in the scriptures provide for us, this is probably one of the well-known ones, I think. And so when you read through the story, just reading and trying to understand what the context says, and you keep in mind that Joseph over in Genesis 45 talked about saving his people in an amazing way, this is a pretty amazing story. But then when you go and you start researching some of the stuff behind, how people have speculated and said about this story, I always find it fascinating that if you take a a slant from a lot of theologians do, as far as this is really just a legendary story. It's a myth. It didn't happen. It's just it's kind of like some of those not fairy tales, princess stories that Disney puts out. Anybody like those? You know, Ariel? Yeah, who's your favorite princess? See? It's a wonderful story, isn't it? It's fun. I like that one Let It Go story. What is it? Let It Go. Frozen, thank you. Yes, that's my favorite song. And so people say that's what it is. It's just a myth. And then some will go so far as to say this story was, shall we say, borrowed from the other cultures in the area. Well, you can study all that if you like. It's not the purpose of this class to go into all those speculative areas. I think this is a great, amazing story if you look at what Joseph said, what God was doing. Chapter 2 of Exodus. Now a man from the family of Levi married a woman who was also from the family of Levi. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw how wonderful the baby was, she hid him for 3 months. But after 3 months, she was not able to hide the baby any longer, so she got a basket made of reeds and covered it with tar so that it would float. She put the baby in the basket, then she put the basket among the tall stalks of grass at the edge of the Nile River. The baby's sister stood a short distance away to see what would happen to him. Now you may recall at chapter 1, he had commanded all of every time a baby is born, a boy rather is born to the Hebrews, you must throw him into the Nile River, but let the girl babies live. I just want to point out that Moses' mother did exactly what the king asked. Right? She threw him into the river after about 3 months, of course. So she actually did. Now, she did hit the basket before it hit the water. And so the basket was floating there. And when you look at the story, it's kind of interesting how she prepositioned, or assumed, the mother said to the sister of the daughter, go stand by in an area and watch and see what happens. I think she also knew that the king's daughter would come there. So everything was being set up. The young baby. And I really like this one line here where it says, when she saw how wonderful the baby was. Tell me, how many mothers you know would look at their baby and go, not a wonderful one. Put it over. Okay? But it's a wonderful, it's great that she loved the baby. I would suggest every mother should take that story, when you have a child. It's wonderful. As a grandfather, I think grandchildren are even more wonderful. You can send them home. And so she put the baby in that basket. The pictures that you see, if you look at this one, it's a nice looking basket. It's all nice and wove. I had this vision when the tar went on some of the baskets I'd colored. But the point is it floated. And so it stayed afloat long enough. And then verse 5, then the daughter of the king of Egypt came to the river to take a bath, and her servant girls were walking beside the river. When they saw the basket in the tall grass, she sent her slave girl to get it. The king's daughter opened the basket and saw the baby boy. He was crying, so she felt sorry for him and said, this is one of the Hebrew babies. Now, politics here comes into play. Not everyone agreed with the king's edict. Obviously, the daughter didn't. And she felt sorry for that Hebrew baby boy that was in that basket. And she knew why it was in there. Now, technically, it should have been, she would have expected to see it drowned in the water. But in this case, there was a basket holding that baby above water. And so then the baby's sister, now, all the details of exactly what took place are provided to us. But at some point, the baby's sister asked the king's daughter, would you like me to go and find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you? The king's daughter said, go. So the girl went and got the baby's own mother. What a wonderful story is that, huh? How amazing is that? The king's daughter finds a baby in the river in a basket, and this girl, I'm going to assume she didn't know her, says, can I go get you a Hebrew woman for her? And gets her mother. Amazing, isn't it? The king's daughter said to the woman, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took her baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, the woman took him to the king's daughter, and she adopted the baby as her own son. The king's daughter named him Moses because she had pulled him out of the water. Amazing story, isn't it? Now, of course, we have the benefit of hindsight. We know what takes place later on, and it's just that this Egyptian king's daughter would find this baby, have compassion on it, take it into her house, if you will, protect it. The mother would actually raise it up to a certain age, and I'm not certain the actual age that she finally took the baby to the woman, but I would imagine, 3 or 4 or 5 years, something like that. And so she took him, and then Moses was then raised in that environment, in that, you hear this thing about privilege today, certain races have certain privileges. Well, he was certainly raised in a lap of luxury. He had everything he needed or wanted. He was educated. He was he probably got every cool chariot that came out each year. You know how the new model comes out the year before? He was probably getting it the year before, kind of thing. So he had everything that he wanted and had privilege and was being trained for, to be in charge of the Egyptian environment. And so we transition. Now, when we transition to verse 11, it says, Moses grew and became a man. Even though it's the previous sentence talks about him being pulled out of the water, and then Moses grew and became a man, we have to realize that it took several years for him to become a man. Sometimes people say, well, this thing just happened just like this, real quick. Well, no, there's some time lag here going on. So we don't know all the details. We don't know if he played baseball every weekend, whether he was on a youth, Boy Scouts or anything like that. What we do know is that he grew into a man. And you can surmise from the luxurious living that he did in the king's family that he had a lot of things at his discretion that he could enjoy. Moses grew and became a man. One day he visited his people and saw that they were forced to work very hard. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew man, one of Moses' own people. Moses looked all around and saw that no one was watching. So he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. No, this touches home with me at least. Have you ever did something, you look around? Nobody's here, just me. And so he took advantage of that moment, he thought, and killed the Egyptian. Now, was he meting out justice? Should he have called 911 to get some help, to stop the beating? Well, what he did, he made a choice there. He didn't like what was happening to his people, and so he took action. Albeit I will suggest the wrong action. But he took it. The next day, Moses returned and saw 2 Hebrew men fighting each other. He said to one that was in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your own people?" The man answered, "Who made you our ruler and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Uh-oh. Moses looked around. There wasn't anybody there. But apparently, there was. And Moses was afraid and thought, now everyone knows what I did. When the king heard what Moses had done, he tried to kill him. But Moses ran away from the king and went to live in the land of Midian, and he sat down near a well. So there's a picture. I forgot to show you the colored version of that. And then you see Moses intervening, and then him running into Midian. So I put the map up there to show that he didn't just go next door. He didn't go to the next city. He went quite a ways away, several hundred miles, a couple hundred miles away at least, to the land of Midian. There was a priest in Midian who had 7 daughters. His daughters went to that well to get water to fill the water troughs for their father's flocks. Some shepherds came and chased the girls away, but Moses defended the girls and watered their flock. Not only is he a well-learned, educated man, he's a gentleman. He protected the ladies. The shepherds, other venal shepherds, chased the girls off. They were just there doing the same thing, but for some reason they wanted to chase them off, and Moses defended him. When they went back to their father Reuel, he asked them, "Why have you come home early today?" The girls answered, "The shepherds chased us away, but an Egyptian defended us. He got water for us and watered our flock." Now, in the way the girls viewed it, he was an Egyptian, not a Hebrew. He was something that they had not experienced with their own kind. And then their father was just kind of, "Well, you guys got home early today. What happened?" He expects them to be home later. He asked his daughters, "Where is this man? Why did you leave him? Invite him to eat with us." Well, obviously he's grateful that this Egyptian would defend his daughters. He wants to express his gratefulness for what happened. Didn't you bring him home so we could feed him and thank him? And so Moses agreed to stay with Jethro. So the story just kind of jumps in there. Kind of jumps there. We don't necessarily see them going back and asking him to come and join them, but apparently they did. And so in verse 21, Moses agreed to stay with Jethro, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses to be his wife. Zipporah gave birth to a son. Moses named him Gershom because Moses was a stranger in a land that was not his own. Now in that one paragraph, you got how many months of living? He comes into the area, fights off the shepherds, saves the shepherd girls. They go home, tell their father. Father invites Moses. Moses gets a wife and kid. Now that's a whirlwind romance. But you got to remember that took time. How many months does it take for a baby before it's born? Anybody know? 9, yes, 9 months, about, give or take. And after a long time, the king of Egypt died. The people of Israel groaned because they were forced to work very hard. When they cried for help, God heard them. It's an important phrase right there. God heard them. God heard their cries, and he remembered the agreement he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He saw the troubles of the people of Israel, and he was concerned about them. So now we've got the story. We've got Moses. We see how he was on the water. The water saved him, so to say. How he grew up and understood very much the Egyptian hierarchy, the way of the Egyptians. He was educated in the ways of the Egyptians. He had character. He goes out to Midian. He defends those young ladies. He's rewarded with a wife and son. And God is hearing the cry of his people. Yes? The Egyptians, you mean? Well, you go back to when Joseph was there. It was a different time. The question is, when Jesus came on, we saw how the Gentiles and Jews didn't get along, or Jews did not want to be with the Gentiles. The Samaritans were even worse as far as the Gentiles and how they looked upon them. It all come about with the Egyptians when Joseph was there, and they accepted them at the time. So just think back at the time when Joseph was there. And he talks about how even though his brothers were intent on hurting him by selling him, God put him down there. God also, because of the character of Joseph, God was with him, and Joseph accepted and gave God the credit for everything. The king of Egypt at that time highly regarded him and put him in charge. And so the people loved him at that time. And so the Egyptians even went with, when they buried Jacob, the whole entourage went. And so they loved him. But over a period of time, all the people of that era passed on. And you can probably think of it today. I remember some things that my parents told me about that made an impression upon me. But even though I told my children these things, they don't impress them as much. World War II was quite a defining moment in our history, but many young people, and this is not criticism, it's just a fact, many young people don't value the experience and the conditions of that time. You see it coming back in our political structure. Some of the things that were fought against in World War II is coming back as great ideas. And so in the time that we're talking about with Moses, the people had come to the point in Egypt, they forgot all that, and they looked upon the Hebrews as invaders. They were growing faster and stronger. They were, the nurses, the Hebrew nurses, midwives said to the king, the Hebrew women are stronger than the Egyptian women, and by the time we get there, they've already had their babies. So it's the times are different. They've changed. Well, I don't know. Yeah. Well, when you're the king's daughter, do you think you get your way? Yeah. The king's daughter says, "This is my baby." And everybody says, "Well, the king said, this is my baby." The king's daughter probably got what she wanted. And then as Moses, it became the adopted son of the king's daughter, he had a lot of privilege. And that to me goes back to what Joseph said, that he's going to keep his people alive in an amazing way. And it happened. And that's the story we have today. The story we love to color, the story we love to tell children. I mean, how many you teachers who have taught little kids have taken half a walnut and done it in such a way and put a little bitty baby Moses in there? You ever done that? That's one of the things I remember, at least. And maybe we were a little low on construction paper when I was a little kid, but it was a walnut shell. It's a wonderful story, so there's many ways you can tell, but through the act of putting him on the water, saved Moses from the edict the king of Egypt said, "Throw all the baby boys in the water." Yeah, and he apparently, his mother had him for a while. It nursed him. So I'm sure she had a conversation with him at some point and stayed in touch with him over a period of time. Speculation, I know, but yet he knew somebody told him he was still a Hebrew, or he was a Hebrew. I believe it was his mother. She was involved with him. Yeah. It's unfortunate that people didn't get along. That's true, and they got to the point where they disliked each other and thus put the Hebrews in slavery. Because of that, they became afraid of them. But still, this is a great story of how God, in an amazing way, saved his people and brought them out of Exodus. We'll see later on. All right, chapter 3. Anybody ever got this particular one to color? I always like doing the coloring of the burning bush. Yeah, what color do you put on the burning bush? Orange. And the orange crayon was never in there. So it was just very traumatic. But, it was one of those where you worked on it. You went through it. But you got to color this, and it was just a fun thing to color. So several years have passed. He's been in Midian. One day, Moses was taking care of Jethro's flock. Jethro was the priest of Midian and also Moses' father-in-law. When Moses led the flock to the west side of the desert, he came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire coming out of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it was not burning up. So he said, I will go closer to the strange things. How can a bush continue burning without burning up? I mean, has anybody ever seen any strange things in their lives? Nobody? And were you curious enough to go check it out? So this is what's happening with Moses. He's out there tending his sheep. He's in the desert. And he looks over in a certain direction and sees a bush that's burning, but it's not being burned up. Now, having had the opportunity to do wildland firefighting, I know when a bush is on fire, it's going to disintegrate. It's just going to go, it's going to disappear. And so you can immediately recognize, and I actually, when I was out there, I'd think about that. I says, I wonder what it would look like if it didn't burn up like Moses saw. But I never saw it. So I didn't get a direct communication from God the way Moses did. And when the Lord saw Moses coming to look at the bush, God called to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. And I often wonder what that tone of voice was like. Often was it deep? Was it high? Was it real commanding? What was it that got his attention, and how did he sound? And Moses says, here am I. I think I would say the same thing. Yes, Lord, here am I. Then God said, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And again, I wish I could just hear that, just so I could hear the inflection of how God talked with him. Moses covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. There was something about that was commanding, something that got his attention, something of his awe that was just amazingly, and the voice, and he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. What a moment. The Lord said, I have seen, oh, by the way, going back up there, because you are standing on holy ground. How many songs you know have holy ground in it, standing on holy ground? This phrase is often sung. I mean, I think we understand, everyone kind of understands what this is talking about, that, you're in the presence of God. And so the emphasis that God said to Abraham was to take off your sandals. Go barefooted in my house. So back to verse 7. The Lord said, I have seen the troubles my people have suffered in Egypt, and I have heard their cries when the Egyptian slave masters hurt them. I am concerned about their pain, and I have come down to save them from the Egyptians. I will bring them out of that land and lead them to a good land with lots of room, a fertile land. It is the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. I have heard the cries of the people of Israel, and I have seen the way the Egyptians have made life hard for them. So now I am sending you to the king of Egypt. Go, bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. What a command. A minute ago, I was just tending sheep. Saw a burning bush that didn't burn. I come over to it, and now I've got a mission. Now I have to go and lead these people out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, I am not a great man. How can I go to the king and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? Now, just kind of hang on for a moment. Just stop here for a second. You remember how I talked about the privilege that Moses lived? The education he has? He's got everything he needs to be a great leader. And he says he doesn't. Moses, what's wrong with you? Can't you see you have the skills? But Moses said to God, I am not a great man. How can I go to the king and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? Self-doubt, okay. I've heard many lessons and Bible studies, if you will, on doubt. And the point is, we look at Moses, and we have to overcome those doubts. We have to recognize the skills that we do have and use them to the best of our abilities. Well, I love this conversation that takes place here. So Moses is saying, wait a minute, I need to go back to the sheep kind of thing. God said, I will be with you. This will be the proof that I am sending you. After you lead the people out of Egypt, all of you will worship me on this mountain. Moses said to God, when I go to the Israelites, I will say to them, the God of your ancestors sent me to you. What if the people say, what is his name? What should I tell them? Well, he's got his curiosity going here. This is good. We're making progress, Moses. Then God said to Moses, I am who I am. And I think in most translations, most renditions of this, all those, this phrase here, I am who I am, it's in all caps. Now, if you're texting with all caps, that usually means you're shouting at me. And I think God was shouting at Moses right here. I am who I am. And the phrase, the words here used are similar to Yahweh in this phrasing. So basically, and I failed to bring the sheet that I wanted to bring, but I'll try to remember what I put down on it. This phrase is similar to what Jesus says, I am the Alpha and Omega. It's God saying to Moses, I am who I am. I don't plan. Nothing encumbers me, if you will. I am. I am God. When you go to the people of Israel, tell them, I am sent me to you. God also said to Moses, this is what you should tell the people. The Lord is the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He sent me to you. This will always be my name by which people from now on will know me. Go. So he gives them some clarifying instructions, I like to say. Go and gather the elders and tell them this. The Lord, the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me. He said, I care about you, and I have seen what has happened to you in Egypt. I promised I would take you out of your troubles in Egypt. I will lead you to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a fertile land. The elders will listen to you. And then you and the elders of Israel will go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the God of the Hebrews appeared to us. Let us travel 3 days into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. Verse 19. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go. Only a great power will force him to let you go. So I will use my great power against Egypt. I will strike Egypt with all the miracles that will happen in that land. After I do that, he will let you go. I will cause the Egyptians to think well of the Israelites. So when you leave, they will give gifts to your people. Each woman should ask her Egyptian neighbor and each Egyptian woman living in her house for gifts, silver, gold, and clothing. You should put those gifts on your children when you leave Egypt, and this way you will take with you the riches of the Egyptians. Now we're going to get into a little bit more in the next chapter, but we're running out of time. And one of the things that come to my mind is, Moses is listening to what the instructions he's getting from God, the orders here. God is laying it out pretty good. You're the guy. I want you to go and to lead my people out of here, and here's what you're going to be doing. He got a task order. The commander-in-chief, so to say, gave him an order. And so as I'm reading through this, it's kind of like, Moses, you got to go and tell somebody that's not going to let you go to let you go. You're going to have to go through this to this individual many times. You're going to have to see him being encumbered, his land, his people, with the miracles that are going to happen. And he's going to be stubborn. It's kind of like, you want me to go do a job that I got to do all this stuff that's going to fail at first, and then we're finally going to succeed. And you can, when we get into chapter 3, sometimes we criticize Moses for being doubtful and hesitant and throwing up a bunch of excuses. But I think Moses was working through the issue in his mind. He's saying, well, I'm going to do something I'm going to fail at. You want me to go and do this important thing? It's supposed to be important, but yet, and so you can see, I believe, that when you look at that, what he might be thinking through his mind because of his training, his education, where he's at, the fact that he doesn't feel he's a great man, or at least that's what he starts out saying. He's trying to figure through some of this stuff. And so he's going to look for proof next chapter. He's going to look for, God's going to give him all the objections or all the concerns Moses put forward. God gives him all he needs to overcome those challenges. All that he needs. Nolan. About 80 years old, yeah. He's, how many in here are 80 years old? You ready to go lead your people out? He's an older man, and he's been given a task by God, and to go lead something, his people out. That's a huge undertaking. Okay, let me get to the end here real quick. As you look at this picture here, he's leading that group of folks out. And they're all just very compliant. They never give him any problems, and life's good. Thank you. See you next week.